Have you ever witnessed someone go from calm to absolutely explosive in seconds? Maybe it was a colleague who snapped over a minor mistake. Maybe it was someone you love who erupted over something that seemed insignificant. Or perhaps, and this is the hardest truth to face, maybe it's you. Maybe you felt that fire rise so fast you couldn't control it. That moment when your vision narrows, your heart pounds, and words come out like weapons you can't take back. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, once said something that explains exactly what's happening in these moments. He said, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." And this is the key to understanding explosive rage. It's not about the present moment. It's never about the traffic, the spilled coffee, or the misplaced keys. It's about everything that came before, everything you swallowed, everything you were told wasn't acceptable to feel. Today we're going to explore something most people misunderstand completely. We're going to uncover the hidden architecture of your psyche that's been built, brick by brick, since childhood. And by the end of this, you'll understand not just why some people explode while others stay calm, but what you can actually do about it. If you're ready to go deeper than surface-level advice and discover what's really happening beneath explosive rage, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to dive into psychology that most people never get access to. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's begin this journey together. Let me start with something that might surprise you. Explosive rage is not a personality defect. It's not a sign of weakness. And despite what you might have been told, it's not even primarily about anger management. Explosive rage is a symptom. It's your psyche's alarm system screaming that something deeper is desperately wrong. If this is already shifting how you see rage, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next will change everything about how you handle intense emotions. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, understood something disturbing yet profound. He said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." But here's what most people miss. Rage is what happens when you've been trying to change yourself to fit impossible situations for so long that your authentic self is suffocating. Think about a pressure cooker. You can keep adding heat, keep building pressure, and as long as that valve releases steam gradually, everything stays contained. But what happens when you seal that valve? Eventually, the entire thing explodes. This is the human psyche under chronic suppression. Let me take you somewhere most psychology doesn't go. The root of explosive rage is emotional invisibility. Imagine growing up in a home where your feelings were consistently dismissed, minimized, or punished. You're sad? Stop being so sensitive. You're angry? Go to your room until you can be pleasant. Over and over, the message is clear. Your inner experience doesn't matter. So you learn to compress. You learn to smile when you're hurting. You learn to say, "I'm fine," when you're falling apart. You become the good child, the reliable employee, the easygoing friend. But here's the thing about compression. It's not elimination. Those feelings don't disappear. They accumulate, they pressurize, and they wait. Carl Rogers believed that every person has an inherent need for positive regard. But what happens when becoming fully yourself meant being rejected or abandoned? You split. You create a false self that's acceptable, and you bury the real self so deep, you forget it exists. Until it reminds you, and it reminds you through rage. Now here's where it gets really interesting. People who explode with rage easily aren't out of control. They're actually exercising the only form of control they learned. When you were small and powerless and your needs weren't met, what could you do? You couldn't leave. You couldn't articulate complex emotions. But you could scream. You could throw things. You could make yourself impossible to ignore. That pattern gets encoded in your nervous system. It becomes your blueprint for getting needs met. So now, decades later, when you feel unheard, dismissed, or invisible, your nervous system doesn't think, "Let me express this calmly." It thinks, "We need to survive. We need to be seen." Deploy the nuclear option. Gabor Mate discovered something that should be taught everywhere. He said, "The question is not why the addiction, but why the pain." And I would add, the question is not why the rage, but why the silence that came before it. Because explosive rage is always preceded by chronic silence. Let me paint you a picture. There's a man named David, known at work as someone with a short fuse. His colleagues walk on eggshells, but here's what David doesn't see. Every time someone makes a mistake or dismisses his idea, it's not just about that moment. It's about every time his father ignored his achievements, every time he learned that his value was conditional. That small mistake at work isn't just a mistake, it's a symbol. It represents every time he wasn't enough, every time he was overlooked, and the rage that follows isn't disproportionate to his history. It's perfectly proportionate. It's just disproportionate to the present moment. When you're looking at someone's rage, you're not looking at their response to now. You're looking at their response to then. Now let's talk about the shame that comes after the explosion. You explode. You say things you don't mean. You hurt people you love. And then you're left with this crushing weight of shame and guilt. You think, what's wrong with me? I'm a terrible person. Yeah. And this shame becomes another layer of suppression, another emotion you have to bury. Here's the terrifying irony. That shame is just more fuel for the next explosion, because now you're not just carrying unprocessed pain from your past, you're carrying unprocessed shame about your present. You're carrying the belief that you're fundamentally broken, fundamentally unlovable. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." But what happens when you don't have a why? When your life feels like a series of obligations and masks? That's when rage becomes your why. Because at least when you're raging, you feel something. At least you feel alive. This is what terrifies people about rage. Not the volume, but the aliveness. Because if rage is the only time you feel fully present, fully powerful, then what does that say about the rest of your life? It says you're not living, you're enduring, you're performing, you're disappearing. Let me take you deeper. Explosive rage isn't just about expressing suppressed emotion. It's about control. When you explode, what happens? People back away. People give you space. In that moment, you've created a boundary that you couldn't create any other way. You've said no more in the only language that got through. This is why rage becomes addictive. Not because it feels good, but because it works. But here's the tragedy. This strategy that worked when you were powerless actively destroys your life when you're an adult. Because now you're not a child who needs to scream to be heard. You're an adult with choices, but you haven't updated your operating system. Alice Miller explained how children who learn to suppress their true selves become adults who can't access their authentic feelings. And without access to authentic feelings, you can't have proportionate responses. You're either numb or nuclear. There's no middle ground. So what does this mean? It means you're not broken. You're adapted. You adapted to an environment that required suppression for survival, and that adaptation, which saved you then, is destroying you now. This is not a moral failure. This is unprocessed trauma expressing itself in the only way it knows how. Now, the secondary gains of rage. On some level, explosive rage serves you. It keeps people at a distance so they can't hurt you. It prevents intimacy that might require vulnerability. It allows you to avoid deeper, more painful feelings. Feelings like grief, loneliness, worthlessness. It's easier to be angry than to feel the crushing sadness that you weren't loved the way you needed. Rage is a shield. But here's what that shield costs you. It costs you connection. It costs you intimacy. It costs you the very thing you're actually desperate for. Bessel van der Kolk wrote, "The body keeps the score." He explains how trauma isn't stored in your thoughts. It's stored in your body, in your nervous system. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. And when something in the present resembles something from the past, your body reacts before your brain can think. Your nervous system is stuck in hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats. And in that state, everything becomes a threat. A tone of voice, a facial expression, a moment of silence. For someone with explosive rage, fight is the default. Not because you're aggressive by nature, but because fighting is what kept you safe. Here's something most people never realize. The person exploding with rage is not the one in control. They feel out of control. They're terrified of their own intensity. They're ashamed. They're desperate to stop but don't know how. Because stopping requires something they've never had. A safe space to feel the feelings underneath. And this is where healing begins. Not in anger management classes. Healing begins in acknowledgement, in naming what actually happened, in giving voice to the child who had to be silent, in grieving the childhood you deserved but didn't get, because rage is just the guardian standing at the gate of your deepest wounds. James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." You can't change rage by pretending it doesn't exist. You can't change it by hating yourself for it. You can change it only by facing it, by turning toward it with curiosity instead of judgment. Because here's what nobody tells you. Underneath the rage is almost always grief. Grief for the love you didn't receive. Grief for the childhood you didn't have. And grief, real grief, it's not explosive. It's soft. It's vulnerable. It's the opposite of rage. And that's why it's so scary. But grief doesn't break you. Suppressing grief breaks you. Feeling it actually heals you. Let me tell you what happens when someone finally allows themselves to feel underneath the rage. At first, it's terrifying. But here's the truth. Emotions are like waves. They rise, they peak, and they fall. Always. When you allow yourself to ride the wave instead of fighting it, something miraculous happens. It passes. This is what people who explode with rage have never experienced. The natural completion of an emotional cycle. They've only known suppression and explosion, but there's another way. Feel it when it's small. Name it. Express it appropriately. Let it move through you and complete. This is emotional maturity. Now, if you recognize yourself in this description, you might be thinking, but the people in my life really are frustrating. My anger is justified. And here's what I want you to hear. Your anger probably is justified. But the intensity of your reaction, the speed of the explosion, that's not about now. That's about then. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your explosive rage feels like fate, but it's not. It's your unconscious. It's all the unprocessed pain erupting because it can no longer be contained. Because anger, healthy anger, is actually necessary. It's your internal compass telling you when boundaries have been violated. But explosive rage isn't healthy anger. It's anger that's been mixed with shame, trauma, fear, and decades of suppression until it's become toxic. So how do you transform destructive rage into constructive anger? First, you develop distress tolerance, the ability to sit with uncomfortable feelings without immediately reacting. When you feel that familiar rise of rage, you pause, just for a moment. You breathe, you notice. This is awareness, and awareness creates space between stimulus and response. Second, you learn to name what you're actually feeling, not just anger, but what's underneath. I feel dismissed. I feel unseen. I feel like I don't matter. These are the real feelings. Rage is just the bodyguard. But when you can name them, you can express them. And when you express them vulnerably, without attacking, something shifts. Third, you have to grieve. You have to let yourself feel the sadness for everything that brought you to this point. For the child who had to learn that their feelings were dangerous. This grief is sacred. It's honoring your own experience. And finally, you rebuild your relationship with yourself. Because at the core of explosive rage is a fundamental belief that you're not okay as you are. This belief has to be replaced with a new truth. You are allowed to need. You are allowed to feel. Your existence is not an inconvenience. This is the journey from rage to peace. Not from rage to numbness, but from rage to genuine peace. The peace that comes from being fully yourself, from expressing needs before they become desperate, from honoring feelings before they become explosive. Healing from explosive rage is not linear. There will be setbacks. But here's the truth. Every time you catch yourself sooner, every time you pause before reacting, that's progress. Healing doesn't mean perfection. It means gradually becoming more aware, more intentional. And here's something beautiful that happens as you heal. Your capacity for joy expands. Because when you're no longer using all your energy to suppress pain, you can finally feel the full spectrum of human emotion. Not just rage and numbness, but contentment, peace, genuine happiness, deep connection. If you're someone who loves someone who explodes easily, this understanding is crucial. Their rage is not about you. You're dealing with someone who's hurting, who learned maladaptive coping strategies. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse, but it does mean you can hold compassion alongside boundaries. The most helpful thing you can do is refuse to engage with the rage. I can see you're very upset. I want to understand what you're feeling, but I can't do that while you're yelling. When you're calm, I'm here to listen. This communicates you care, but you won't participate in the explosion. Now I want to end with this. Explosive rage is not the problem. It's a symptom. The problem is disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from your authentic feelings, from your true needs. And the solution is reconnection. Learning to be with yourself compassionately. Learning to express needs clearly. This reconnection doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. But every step makes life more livable, more real. Every moment of awareness is a victory. Every pause before reacting is progress. Every vulnerable expression instead of explosion is transformation. The rage you carry is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's showing you where you're still hurting, where you still need healing. And when you can turn toward it with curiosity and compassion instead of shame and fear, it begins to transform into appropriate anger that protects boundaries, into clear communication, into the raw energy of aliveness itself. So if you're someone who explodes easily, I want you to hear this. You're not defective. You're not broken beyond repair. You're carrying wounds that were never meant to be carried alone. And the very thing you're most ashamed of, your rage, is actually pointing the way toward your healing. This is the psychology of explosive rage, not a diagnosis, but a description, not a life sentence, but a starting point. And the invitation is to finally set it down, to feel what needs to be felt, to say what needs to be said, to become who you always were underneath all that protective fire, not by extinguishing the flame, but by learning to hold it safely, express it wisely, and let it illuminate your path forward instead of burning everything in its wake. I want to hear your story. What clicked for you in this video? What pattern did you finally recognize? Share in the comments below. Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this video helped you understand yourself or someone you love, share it with them. Sometimes understanding is the first step to healing.